The maitre d' looked at me the way people look at a lost dog that wandered into the wrong yard. Not cruel, exactly, just certain I didn't belong there. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I don't see your name on the reservation list. This is a private event this evening." I looked past his shoulder at the dining room. My son was standing near the bar in a suit that probably cost more than my first truck. He was laughing at something a man in a gray blazer said, and the sound of it carried all the way to the entrance, easy, polished, belonging. He hadn't seen me yet. "The name is Frank Calloway," I said. "My son made this reservation." The maitre d' checked his clipboard again, slower this time, as if giving the situation a chance to resolve itself without drama. "I see a reservation for Mr. Derek Calloway and guests," he said. "But I'm afraid you weren't included on the guest list, sir. I'd driven 45 minutes to get there. I was wearing my good jacket, the dark blue one my wife Helen had picked out for me 3 Christmases ago, before she passed. My boots were clean. I had done everything right. Could you let my son know I'm here?" I asked. He hesitated just a fraction of a second. "Of course." I waited by the entrance while he walked over to Derek. I watched my son's face when the maître d' leaned in and spoke quietly. There was no surprise in Derek's expression. That was the part that settled into my chest like a cold stone. There was no surprise at all. He excused himself from the group and walked toward me. He was smiling, but it was the smile he used in meetings managed. Professional. Not the one I remembered from when he was a boy pulling catfish out of the creek behind our house. "Dad," he said, lowering his voice as soon as he reached the entrance. "What are you doing here?" "You told me to come," I said. "You called me last Tuesday. You said the dinner was Friday at 7. Hargrove's restaurant. Celebration for the company's new contract." He rubbed the back of his neck. I know. But things changed. This became more of a client dinner. Corporate people. Investors. It wouldn't really be the right fit. I let that sit between us for a moment. "Not the right fit," I said. "Dad, don't make this a thing. I'll come by the house this weekend. We'll have dinner. Just the 2 of us. Tonight is it's business." I looked at his hands. Smooth, soft. Good hands for signing documents and shaking with people whose shoes cost $400. My hands, standing next to his, looked like they came from a different world entirely. Cracked along the knuckles. A scar across the left palm from a table saw when I was 29. Permanent stain of motor grease in the creases that no amount of scrubbing had ever fully removed in 40 years. I built things with these hands. I built the house Derek grew up in. Not metaphorically, I literally poured the foundation, framed the walls, ran the electrical through every room. It took me 2 years working weekends and evenings. I wanted him to grow up in something that was ours. "All right," I said. Derek's shoulders dropped half an inch with relief. "I'll call you tomorrow." He turned and walked back to his table. I stood there another moment watching him settle back into his group, watching the conversation pick right back up like a door that had been briefly opened and then closed again. I drove home in the dark. I need to tell you something about my son, because this story isn't about one dinner. It's about 15 years of small moments that I'd been adding up without realizing I was keeping a ledger. Derek is 41 years old. He runs a real estate development company that he built himself. And I am proud of him for that, genuinely, without reservation. He was smart in school, driven in a way that neither his mother nor I could fully account for. He wanted something different from what we had, and he went and got it. I never once resented him for it. What I didn't see coming was that wanting something different would come to include wanting a different father. It started small. He stopped bringing his friends around when I was visiting. He'd mentioned casually that I might want to dress up a bit for certain occasions. He introduced me to his business partner once as my dad. He's in the trades. Not an electrician. Not a master electrician with 30 years running my own contracting business. The trades. Like a general category. Like I was interchangeable with any other man who worked with his hands. His wife Vanessa is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. She grew up in a family that measured success a certain way. And Derek had become that measurement. She wasn't cruel to me. She was just managing. aware of me as a variable that needed to be controlled for in certain social situations. My granddaughter Lily was 9 years old and had no idea any of this was happening. She called me every Sunday and told me about her week and asked if I'd fixed the bird feeder she'd helped me paint last summer. She was the one uncomplicated thing in all of this. She didn't know her father was embarrassed by me. I don't think she would have believed it if I'd told her. I didn't call Derek that weekend. He didn't call me either. 3 weeks passed. Then my phone rang on a Wednesday evening, and it was Vanessa, which was unusual enough that I sat up straighter when I heard her voice. "Frank," she said, and her tone was warm in the specific way that means something is being asked. I wanted to reach out personally. "Derek's firm just landed the Meridian contract. You may have heard him mention it. We're having a celebration at the house. Saturday afternoon. Family and a few close friends. We'd love for you to be there." I noticed the word love doing a lot of work in that sentence. "Of course," I said. "What time?" 2 o'clock. "And Frank?" A slight pause. "It's a bit of a mix. Family and some of Derek's professional contacts. Just so you know. Just so I knew to dress accordingly. Just so I knew to manage myself." I understood the language by now. "I'll be there," I said. I spent more time getting ready that Saturday than I had in years. Not because I was nervous, but because I was tired of giving anyone a reason. I wore the blue jacket again, and a collared shirt, and the good leather shoes I'd bought for Helen's funeral and worn maybe 4 times since. I looked in the mirror before I left and saw a 64-year-old man who had worked hard his entire life and had nothing to apologize for. I drove to my son's house. It is a large house in a neighborhood full of large houses, and I know every nail in its framing because Derek hired my old apprentice Marcus to build it 6 years ago, and Marcus called me twice during construction to ask my opinion on the load-bearing wall configuration. I never mentioned this to Derek. There were cars lining the street when I arrived. The party was in full swing in the backyard, which was professionally landscaped and had a catering setup along the far fence. I spotted Lily immediately. She was in a yellow dress near the edge of the patio, looking slightly bored in the way 9-year-olds look when they're surrounded by adults talking about things that don't interest them. She saw me, and her whole face changed. "Grandpa Frank!" She ran across the grass and I caught her, and for a moment, the whole afternoon reorganized itself around that one thing. "Hey there, bird feeder," I said, which was what I called her sometimes, and she laughed the way she always did at that. "The Blue Jays found it," she said into my shoulder. 3 of them. Mom said they're a family. "Good," I said. "That's what it was for." I set her down and she took my hand and pulled me toward the food table, and I followed her because that's always the right decision. Derek found me about 20 minutes later. He looked slightly tense, but he greeted me properly, handshake, pat on the arm, and introduced me to 2 men standing nearby as my dad. Nothing added, nothing subtracted. I filed that away, as progress of some kind. The afternoon moved along. I stayed near the edges mostly, talked with a few of Derek's older neighbors who were sensible people, watched Lily orbit the party like a small moon. I was doing fine. Then I heard Vanessa's voice behind me, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. "His father?" "Yes. He's in construction. Blue-collar background. Very salt of the earth." She said, "Salt of the earth the way you'd say something was vintage. An artifact. A charming relic." The woman she was talking to glanced over at me without realizing I was the subject of the sentence. I didn't say anything. I finished my glass of lemonade and set it down carefully on the table. About an hour later, Vanessa pulled Derek away from a conversation to speak with a man who'd just arrived, someone named Arthur Holt, who I'd heard mentioned several times that afternoon in reverential tones. He was the senior partner at the investment group backing the Meridian project. Everything about the party, I now understood, had been angled toward this man's arrival. I watched Arthur Holt shake Derek's hand. I watched Derek transform slightly in front of him. Not fake, exactly, but heightened, more careful. This was the version of my son that I had the least access to. Arthur Holt was about my age. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never once worried about a mortgage payment. He worked the patio with handshakes and laughs, and eventually his path brought him near me. He looked at me with polite, neutral curiosity. "Arthur Holt," he said, extending his hand. "Frank Calloway," I said. Are you in the industry? Electrical contracting, I said. 30 years. I'm retired now. He nodded, the kind of nod that is also a conclusion. He was about to move on. You know, I said. And I wasn't sure myself why I continued. I did the electrical work on the Denton Medical Complex back in 2003, and the wiring on the original Fairfield office building on Route 9 that was mine too. Before the renovation, Arthur Holt paused. The Fairfield building, he said. On Route 9. Yes, sir. He looked at me differently then. I own that building. I know, I said. Marcus, who built this house we're standing in, he was my apprentice for 6 years. There was a moment of recalibration behind his eyes. You trained Marcus Reeves? From the ground up, I said. Arthur Holt did not move on then. He stayed, and we talked for 25 minutes about building and materials and the way construction had changed. And he had opinions and I had opinions, and we disagreed respectfully on 2 things and agreed on everything else. It was the best conversation I'd had at that party by a significant distance. At some point, I noticed Derek standing about 15 feet away, watching us with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in a long time. Something between confusion and something else I couldn't quite name yet. Arthur Holt asked for my phone number before he left. He said he had a project coming up, renovation of a historic property he'd acquired in the county. Needed someone he could trust for the electrical consultation. He said Marcus had done good work. And if I'd trained Marcus, he trusted my eye. I gave him my number. We shook hands. After he left, Derek came over to me immediately. What were you two talking about? He asked. Construction, I said. The old Fairfield building. He owns that building. I know. Derek looked at me for a moment. How did you know that? I make it my business to know what happened to the things I built, I said. He was quiet for a second. Then, Dad, I didn't at Hargrove's that night. I want you to know that was Derek, I said. It's all right. It wasn't all right. I know it wasn't. Lily came running over and crashed into my side, asking if I wanted to see the birdbath she and Derek had built last spring. I let her pull me away. I didn't look back at my son's face, but I heard him exhale. Arthur Holt called me the following Tuesday. The project was real. A 1920s farmhouse he'd converted to a small event venue, needed a full electrical assessment and consult before he could get the occupancy permit renewed. He offered a consulting fee that was more than I'd expected. You don't have to pay me like that, I said. I'm retired. I pay what things are worth, he said simply. We met at the property the following Thursday. It was a beautiful old place. White clapboard siding and wide plank floors and the kind of bones that modern construction rarely has. I walked through it for 3 hours with a flashlight and a notepad and found 4 things that needed attention before any permit office would sign off, and 5 other things that nobody had asked about, but that I'd have felt wrong leaving unmentioned. Arthur Holt followed me through the whole walkthrough, asking questions, listening closely to the answers. He was the kind of man who had made his money by actually understanding things rather than delegating the understanding to other people. You've still got the eye, he said when we finished. Hard to lose it, I said. It's like reading. Once you know how, you can't walk into a room and not read everything in it. He laughed. I want you to consult on 2 other properties after this one, if you're open to it. I told him I'd think about it. I was already thinking yes. But I'd learned a long time ago not to say yes to things before you've slept on them. On the drive home, I passed the exit for Derek's neighborhood and thought about my son's face when he'd watched Arthur Holt and me talking at the party. That expression I hadn't been able to name. I named it now. It was the look of someone seeing something they'd miscalculated. Derek called me that Friday evening. This time it wasn't managed. His voice was different off script in a way I hadn't heard since he was much younger and needed to tell me something he was embarrassed about. I've been thinking about Hargrove's, he said. About what I said. Derek, no, let me. I said it wasn't the right fit. That's what I said. He paused. I've been telling myself it was about business, protecting the professional image. But I think I've been telling myself that for a while, about a lot of things, and it isn't true. I was in my kitchen. I sat down at the table where we'd eaten 10,000 dinners when he was a boy, where he'd done his homework while I paid bills, where his mother had read to him every night until he was old enough to tell her it was embarrassing. "I'm ashamed of how I've been," he said. "Not recently. For a while. And I think you've known it and you haven't said anything, and I think that's—" His voice tightened slightly. "I think that was patient in a way I didn't deserve." I thought about what to say for a long moment. "You know what I remember," I said finally, "is when you were about 12, and you came with me on a job at the old Riverside school. Electrical fault in the gymnasium. It was a Saturday, and you had nothing else to do, so you tagged along, and I was up on the ladder, and I asked you to hand me the wire stripper, and you knew exactly which one it was." Without hesitating, he was quiet. "You'd been watching," I said, "paying attention without knowing you were paying attention. That's always been true about you. The watching part. I was proud of you then." I paused. "I'm proud of you now. That hasn't changed, Dad." His voice broke slightly on the word, just for a second, and then he got it back under control. "Come for dinner Sunday," I said. "Bring Lily. Bring Vanessa if she wants to come." "Yeah," he said. "Yeah. Okay. I'll make the chili." He made a sound that was close to a laugh. "You always make the chili." "Because it's the only thing I make that's worth eating," I said. "There's something I've learned in 64 years that I want to say plainly, because I think it gets buried under the story sometimes. The hands that build things leave marks. Calluses and scars and permanent stains in the creases of the knuckles that no soap will entirely remove. For most of my life, I thought of those marks as just the cost of the work. I didn't assign them meaning. What I understand now is that my son spent years looking at those hands and seeing something to be managed, something that complicated the story he was trying to tell about himself. And I understand that too when you're building yourself into something new. Sometimes you want the distance from where you started. I don't hold that against him. But I also know that Arthur Holt saw those hands and knew exactly what they meant. He knew what 40 years of careful work looked like, and he valued it without ambiguity. And that mattered more to me than any dinner reservation or party guest list. The things I built are still standing. The Denton Medical Complex, the Fairfield Building, the house my son lives in the wall configurations Marcus consulted me on, in the framing that will hold up for 100 years if someone doesn't tear it down first. The house Derek grew up in, every nail of it, every wire, the bird feeder Lily and I painted last summer, which 3 blue jays have apparently decided is their home now. You don't need people to acknowledge what you've built. The building itself is the acknowledgement. It stands up, or it doesn't. Mine stood up. Sunday came with the particular quality of late autumn light that makes everything look slightly more serious and more beautiful at the same time. The sun coming in low and golden through the kitchen windows while I stood at the stove. Lily arrived first, running ahead of her parents from the car to the front door, and she banged on it like she always did, 3 fast knocks and then 1 slow one. Our signal, and I opened it, and she held up a drawing she'd made. "It's the bird feeder," she said. "With the blue jays. I made them a family. There's a mom and a dad and a baby one. This is going on the refrigerator," I said. "It's already full," she said. "I counted 11 things on there. Then we'll make room," I said. That's always the answer. Derek came through the door behind her, and Vanessa behind him. Derek looked at me with the straightforward, open expression of someone who has made a decision about something and is committed to it. He held out his hand and then seemed to think that wasn't enough and pulled me into a hug instead, the kind with actual pressure behind it, not the performative kind. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Hey," I said. Vanessa was quieter than usual. She didn't have the managed warmth from the phone call, and what replaced it was something more real and slightly uncomfortable, which I respected more. She said the house smelled good and asked if she could help with anything, and I gave her the cornbread to watch in the oven because everyone needs a job. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table. I'd refinished it twice in 30 years, but the bones were original. The same table where Derek had done his homework and his mother had read to him, and I had paid bills with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Lily sat next to me and told me everything about her week in the sequential, thorough way that children have before they learn that adults often want the short version. I did not want the short version. I listened to all of it. After dinner, when Lily had gone to watch something in the living room and Vanessa was helping with the dishes, Derek sat across from me at the table with 2 cups of coffee between us. Arthur Holt called me yesterday, he said. I looked at him. He called to tell me he'd enjoyed talking with you at the party. He said you were one of the most knowledgeable people he'd spoken to in the trades in 20 years. Derek turned his coffee cup in his hands. He wanted to make sure I knew. I thought about that for a moment. I didn't ask him to do that. I know, Derek said. That's what made it. That's the part that's been sitting with me. He looked up. He thought I didn't know. What you'd done. The buildings you'd worked on. He assumed I didn't know because otherwise he stopped. Tried again. Otherwise, why would I have left you standing in the entrance at Hargrove's? The kitchen was quiet except for the water running in the sink and the faint sound of the television from the other room. There's a lot I want to do differently, Derek said. I know. That's easy to say. It is easy to say. I agreed. But you're here. That's the starting place. He nodded slowly. Then he looked at my hands, resting on the table, and I watched him see them clearly, maybe for the first time in a long time. The way you finally read something you've been looking at without reading. I remember that Saturday at the school, he said quietly. The wire stripper. I know you do, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, Dad. The words sat between us simply, without decoration. The way good things are built, one solid piece at a time. I know, I said. Me too. Neither of us specified what we were each apologizing for. We didn't need to. Some reckonings don't require a full accounting out loud. They just require the 2 people to be in the room together, at the same table, willing to stay. In the living room, Lily laughed at something on the television, bright and uncomplicated and loud enough to reach us. Derek looked toward the sound, and the tension in his face let go a fraction, the way it does when something real breaks through. I picked up my coffee. He picked up his. Outside, somewhere in the yard, the Blue Jays had found a place to be.